I got all I want, and I got all I need, and I got everything. I got you and me. All I need is what we got together today.
Marriage is the best. Hey, welcome back to Marriage is the Best. Marriage of the Best. You know what? Thanks for tuning in. Today we're going to be talking about resentment and bitterness. And as I was thinking about this topic, I was thinking about how some of the things that some of the tools that are necessary in order to create a sustainable system in your marriage are positive tools, right? Things that you need to be actively doing in order to protect the marriage and to sustain the connection, to take care of the marital essence, if you will. Today, resentment and bitterness, we're going to be talking about the negative side of that. Basically, what internally do you need to protect your marriage against? Resentment and bitterness are negative dynamics that you need to protect your marriage against. And the reason, we're going to talk about the reason why you have to kind of protect your marriage, kind of what leads to that resentment, maybe what it looks like, what it feels like, those kinds of things. Some antidotes to resentment and bitterness, and then, we'll kind of wrap up our time. Resentment and bitterness are essentially poison to your marriage, or to really any relationship. They are the initial cracks, the early warning signs that eventually, if they're not, addressed, if the cracks are not addressed, then a chasm is going to form in your relationship. And that chasm just continues to grow over time if you allow resentment and bitterness to take root. They are the precursors to long-term, long-form disconnection that will lead to the four horsemen. The four horsemen are the four dynamics in marriages that are predictive of divorce. So that would be contempt, basically hateful speech, criticism, character assassination, and demeaning language, stonewalling, kind of turtling up and defending yourself, and kind of shutting down and going inward and not engaging, essentially. And then defensiveness, kind of a inverse of stonewalling, going to your own defense and feeling like you're always being attacked, essentially. And a lot of those different dynamics we address in our second episode on abuse, and then also on the fear and shame cycle. I think we do, talk a little bit about some of those four horsemen. They come from John and Julie Gottman, who you're going to hear. You've probably already kind of gotten sick of hearing them, but they came up with it. Okay, it's not my fault that they did it, and I have to give them credit because it's good work. So bitterness and resentment are the precursors to, and will lead to contempt, criticism, stonewalling, and defensiveness. And you could think of those four things as signs of a dying marriage. The marriage is dying, the marriage is on its way out. If you see these four things, then basically you're looking at divorce. So you can see why guarding your marriage from bitterness and resentment, kind of those precursors, is really helpful and worthwhile and would build a sustainability in your marriage. So what is resentment? Resentment is a feeling of deep bitterness, anger, or displeasure towards someone or something, often resulting from a perceived injustice, betrayal, or wrongdoing. It usually builds up over time when a person feels hurt, mistreated, or unfairly treated, but does not fully express or resolve those feelings. Resentment can strain relationships, fuel grudges, and negatively impact mental and emotional well-being. It often stems from unmet expectations, unresolved conflicts, or feeling undervalued. Letting go of resentment typically requires forgiveness, open communication, or a shift in perspective to heal and move forward. Resentment, I would say, is like lingering anger. And I think that bitterness actually is kind of tied into resentment. I almost think of them as a single entity. They have definitely like a building relationship where you can become embittered, and then that will lead to you feeling resentment. So yeah, bitterness, I think, is actually a part of resentment, and almost might be like a sign of kind of you walking that direction toward resentment. So lingering anger, bitterness, it's like a festering wound will lead to resentment. Conflict leads to resentment, can lead to resentment, and disconnection, especially something that just like continues to come up and goes unaddressed. A consistent pattern of communication where one party always feels like dismissed or unheard, that can oftentimes leads to resentment. You ignoring your own like feelings within the context of conflict and not speaking up when you need to speak up, not representing your side of the marriage and representing your expectations and your needs and your thoughts and your feelings, that I think can actually create bitterness and lead to resentment. Because again, you're not feeling heard, you're not feeling known, because you're not sharing those things. So that would be one road that would lead to bitterness, is kind of like shutting yourself down over time. Avoiding the 1,000 necessary conflicts, I think, can lead to resentment and bitterness, because when we're avoiding the conflicts, what we're really doing is we are kind of shutting down our relationship's ability to kind of grow through hardship, grow through kind of that iron sharpening iron idea where there's sparks and heat and discomfort, right? And so avoiding those conflicts and kind of burying what you need to be saying. This is why ignoring your feelings is leads to the same kind of dynamic. They lead to the same place, ignoring your feelings and avoiding the conflict. And they definitely are very similar in that. So yeah, I think those are a lot of the things that lead to people feeling resentment and bitter toward their partner. I get to the pleasure of seeing a lot of marriages in the office, and I've definitely sat in a few different rooms with a few different couples that were just really steeped in bitterness, fully immersed in it. And it's very interesting to sit with a couple that has gotten to that level. It is very uncomfortable. There's a real heaviness in the session. There's the room kind of has the air sucked out of it. There's a sense of, there's like this huge tension in the room as you're walking through, even if no one's saying anything. It doesn't feel like there's air. There's this huge tension. Then when people do start talking, nobody can hear anybody else, including me, right? As a third party trying to engage and ask questions and talk through things. They can't hear themselves, and they also can't hear me. They're completely closed off to one another. They're the other's influence, the other's voice. There's that wall that builds up where you can't reach me. And I think, oftentimes that comes from that hurt place that we talked about, that festering kind of wound, lingering conflicts, lingering feelings that have never had the opportunity to flesh themselves out and like work themselves out of the system. So those get just like built up, and then they get expressed in kind of shutting off, shutting down, and turning away from your partner. And then another thing that I see really often in these situations is there's a hyper focus on blaming the other person, and a hyper focus on, well, my needs. So bitterness and resentment often lead to a very self-focused marriage, and a self-focused marriage is not a sustainable one. You can't sustain your marriage by just focusing on yourself, my needs, and blaming the other person for not fulfilling them. I had a really wonderful conversation with my work mentor about needs and how oftentimes he runs into people or individuals within marriages who are all about meet my needs, meet my needs, meet my needs. You're not meeting my needs. And I was having actually a trouble with one of my cases, and he talked to me about how when I focus on the needs in my work, I give that almost permission to continue on in their pattern in their relationship, because I'm allowing kind of that needs-based marriages, because I'm allowing the idea that marriage is a vehicle for me to get my needs met. I'm allowing that idea to kind of be alive and well, as opposed, like if we were to focus on it in session. So I pivoted right with the case, and I attempted to kind of reframe it myself so I could reframe it for them, and we attempted to kind of work through and work out the focus of it's their fault and my needs aren't being met. It's kind of what it feels like in session. Like physically, I guess there's definitely a look to a very embittered couple. There's kind of a crossed, closed off, distant dynamic in their physicality. This is the whole kind of trope where, and maybe it's not, maybe this is just something that, because of my field, it's a trope for me, but like couples will come in and they'll sit on the opposite side of the couch, or one will sit on a chair and one will sit on the couch, and then they would kind of face, literally like turn their bodies away from each other, where one will be looking that way, one will be looking this way. You kind of cross your legs opposite of one another, shoulders turned away. Like there's like this physical manifestation of it sometimes. So there's something that I notice fairly often. There's definitely some facial things going on when a marriage is stuck in bitterness and resentment, and it does change kind of the way that you're looking and the way that you kind of carry yourself into the marriage work, I suppose. So yeah, there's some physical signs of like, well, that's kind of what it looks like. I don't know how helpful that is to you, being that you don't have a mirror of what you look like when you're interacting with your spouse, but that's something that we notice and something that we see. And it's definitely one of those signs that, when coupled with all of the other things that are said and done in the session, that kind of lead one to believe that bitterness and resentment has taken root and is threatening the system. There's some of the feelings in session. There's like a feeling of immovable anger, this like hardness, like if you think about like the hardness scale, when you learned about that in geology, when you learned about that in geology, the hardness scale, where diamond can't be scratched, it can't be touched, it can't be, like changed at all. And where kind of on the far end, maybe slate or one of the like the really much softer rocks, can be scratched by a penny or can be dented and, almost like chalk, it kind of just like falls apart. There's this sense in the session of diamond-like hardness where I will not be changed by you. That's that's kind of the feeling that I get. The fondness, obviously, that whole system, which we just covered, that fondness and admiration system is either completely non-existent. there's no positivity, there's no fondness, there's no admiration shared, or it's buried many, 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 many layers below the surface. And so there might be some hints of it. You might be able to like pull out a pity laugh and pull out some of these different dynamics about like getting them to think about what they were like when they first started, or getting them to think about what they actually like about their partner. Then you can kind of maybe see some light. And that is something that, you know, you kind of like want to screen through is this system salvageable? Is it there? Is it buried, or is it like murdered, you know, back room and left for dead and not going to return? So yeah, so those are some of the feelings of resentment and bitterness. And when you're working as a counselor, when I am working as a counselor, that I kind of notice as I move through the dynamics of bitterness and resentment. And so, you know, I guess this could be helpful because you could start to look for the signs of your own bitterness, your own resentment, the feeling, like if you resonate with that feeling, or you resonate or notice some of the physicality, if you resonate or notice some of those looks and feels, I think that those could be good reflections. Like, oh, like that may be us. Like maybe we're struggling, or maybe bitterness and resentment is going to kind of threaten us. And maybe we need to get more defensive. Well, maybe we should get better. Maybe we should improve our defenses against these dynamics of bitterness and resentment if we are at all allowing them to come in and have a place in our marriage. Okay, so now that we know what resentment is, what leads to resentment in our relationships, how important it is to defend our relationships from marriage, from bitterness and resentment, and we kind of know what it looks like, what it feels like, what are some things that are clinically relevant, you know, that you can maybe kind of look at your relationship through that lens. We're also going to want to talk a little bit about antidotes. So how do we avoid becoming embittered? How do we avoid becoming resentful of our spouses? And we talked a little bit about this when we kind of defined it, but basically you're going to want to speak out. You're going to want to really build up your awareness of how you're actually feeling and what needs to be stated in order for you to root out those bitter, resentful, angry thoughts and feelings that you're having toward your partner. And so building awareness, you know, so that you know what they are and how you're feeling and what things are going unsaid, and then also speaking those things out. There is no conflict that is too small when it comes to bitterness and resentment. You know, if it's going to go there, if it's going to if it's just a little bit of, that's like that whole saying of like a little bit of poop in the cake, you know, ruins the whole cake. I've never tried that, but I'm just kind of going on faith, just kind of believing that that's the case. But a little bit of bitterness and resentment, it can poison the whole thing, because it will grow and it will take and take and take and take, if not uprooted, if not rooted out of the system. So yeah, how are you actually feeling? You know, what are your authentic, genuine experiences in your marriage? You know, sometimes this actually comes up sexually, where one or the other partner will have been feeling kind of used or, you know, down or sad about the way that they're moving through their sexual intimate relationship. And that is one really deep area of a person, right? Like it touches us emotionally and physically and spiritually and, you know, and basically all of the levels. And so if you're not saying something when it comes to how you guys are moving through your sexual relationship, that can ultimately lead to catastrophic failure in the marriage because it hits all those levels. So, you know, looking at your emotions. Am I angry? Am I short? Am I bitter? Am I upset? Not like here and there or when I'm stressed and tired and hungry, but as a regular kind of theme in the marriage. Are those things coming up, and are they kind of dominating or growing in the relationship? It's often going to be a sign that there are things that you haven't said, that haven't been talked about, that haven't been gone through, that really need your attention. And I think that actually, if we look at bitterness and resentment as a signal, that would be like blaring fire alarm, act now. In our emotions, that's the signal. The signal is something is very broken in our relationship, and we need to spend some time looking at this broken thing. And so the utility, I suppose we could have covered this earlier, but the utility of the bitterness and the resentment, I think, is actually to get you to stop doing whatever you're doing, stop doing the dishes, and go to your partner and say, hey, I'm carrying this thing. I want you to know, and I'd like us to work on it. Do it now. Do it now. Do it now. Right? Like that's the bitterness. That's the resentment. It's the signal that, hey, if this doesn't get resolved, if we don't talk about this thing, then catastrophic failure very well may be in our future. So there is a utility to the feelings, and if you're feeling them, there's a reason. If you're feeling them, it's not necessarily that you're broken or your system is broken. They will break your system, but it doesn't mean, just because you're having those feelings doesn't mean that the system isn't working the right way. It's what we're doing with the bitterness, the resentment, the anger, the frustrations, the irritations. It's what we're doing with those that makes all the difference. So ignoring them, right, leads to exactly what we've discussed. And going after them and attacking them and discussing them, bringing them out from the darkness within you, your thoughts and your heart, into the light, by speaking them out and saying, hey, Becca, it really, really hurt me when you said X and Y and Z the other day. I've been thinking about it, and I've been feeling dejected and distant and frustrated and angry, and I don't want to do a single thing around the house because that's just how I'm feeling. And I need you to know that, because I have to defend our relationship against this bitterness that I feel growing inside of me. So yeah, I want to encourage you, like if you are feeling that way, it's, again, you're not broken, but it can break your system. And so knowing what to do with your bitterness and resentment as it crops up and as it kind of presents itself is really important. That's some of the awareness. One thing I wanted to point out here is that one thing that counseling is actually really good at is providing people a space for exploring those dynamics. Maybe you're really bitter, maybe you're really resentful, maybe you're really angry at your spouse and you don't know where to start, or you don't think you could start very nicely right now. Maybe where you could start is with a distant third party who knows a thing or two and is going to kind of encourage you toward your relationship. You don't want to sign up for a counselor who's going to tell you to leave and that it's not worth it, because that does happen. But, maybe finding someone who can be in your corner, who you trust, who's a good fit for you, who cares about you and wants to see you healthy and well, sitting with them and talking through and walking through some of the bitterness, some of the resentment, some of the anger, some of the irritation, and finding your voice, finding your ability to both be aware of those things and to communicate them. The goal in addressing the blame and the resentment is to protect and guard your marriage, knowing that it needs to be guarded and protected, knowing that over time it will become wounded and broken if we don't actively address those things. Now, so one thing that you need to know if you go and do this is that you're not necessarily going to be creating peace and positivity by addressing your blame and resentment. Okay? I'm not promising peace. I'm not promising positivity. I'm not promising pretty much anything, except for that if you guard your marriage against blame and resentment, you will have a much, much, much longer marriage. And I hope it'll also be happier eventually. But it's very painful to address some of this resentment and bitterness, because it's not nice for Becca to say to me, hey, I'm feeling really unseen. Hey, I'm feeling really disconnected this week. I don't feel like we've spent enough time together. I don't feel like we've spent, whatever it might be. You haven't said that I look beautiful today, but if she's got something to say, it's not nice to hear those things, right? I'm just having trouble coming up with examples. It's not nice to hear those things. It's really not. It doesn't feel good for her to be disconnected, or for her to be angry with me or irritable. Those things can be really hurtful. Okay. So the idea isn't that you're going to be creating peace and positivity by addressing your blame and resentment. It is not a positive reinforcing, strengthening exercise. Okay. It is not a positive, sustainable system dynamic. This is a negative sustainable system dynamic. Do all of these things. Do your 20-minute conversations. Do your conflicts. Do your, weekly, bi-weekly, tri-weekly date nights, intentional kind of hours every week. Do your nights away. Did anybody schedule their nights away? This is your reminder to schedule your night away. And as you're doing that, protect your marriage from resentment and bitterness as it crops up by consistently addressing the conversations that need to be had in order to weed out some of those emotional dealios. And every marriage is going to have those. So you're not alone, you're not wrong, and it does need to be addressed. Okay, so the opposite of blame and resentment doesn't create positivity, right? As an after effect of lingering hurts and wounds and missed expectations and pain and anger, the opposite of those things is actually working through your negative experiences with your spouse and learning to heal and repair when you break things with each other. So we know what makes marriage work. We really do. We know what makes it sustainable. We know what breaks it. We know what hurts it. We can predict it. Not me, but like people who are good at that stuff can predict it to almost utmost certainty. No, it is incredibly predictable. So therefore, we should be studying it, and we should be putting into practice the systems that create sustainability inside of it. And so many couples have come before us and have done that. And we have more resources now and more things in our culture that we can turn to, podcasts and books and stories and models for positive marriages than ever before. And so find your models, find your books, find your podcasts, find those things that are going to encourage you every day to continue to lean in on your marriage, to continue to create sustainability in it, to continue to value it, to continue to prioritize it. Go and do that and enjoy the fruits of that as you move through those early seasons of processing through your marriage. And it is so blissful and beautiful to have worked through thousands of conflicts and to have protected and guarded a marriage from resentment and bitterness, and to be in a season where there's a flow in the relationship, a flow of understanding and acknowledgement and peace and security, a flow of love and affection and gorgeous beautifulness, and just, all of these really wonderful, wonderful fruit that comes from putting in this work. So that's at the end of this. If you put in the work, You're going to find that. You will. Eventually you will find it. If you're putting in the work, if you're doing your positive stuff, if you're doing your negative stuff, you're going to find just a really beautiful, blessed marriage relationship. And it is the best. Thanks, everybody. So bitterness and resentment, or resentment and bitterness, the R&B of marriage, you know what I mean? The predictability of marriage is crazy high. It's one of the highest of probably any scientific field. Oh boy, that's quite the claim. Yeah, right. Don't write that down. Oh boy. Scratch that, reverse it. But thanks everybody.